It's a Thought Police free zone. The Liberty Lineup radio show, where independent thought just can't be bought.
I'm an American. Red, white, and blue. And I'm a citizen of this world and of heaven. Some things were meant to be together. I believe in faith and freedom. Got a country too. I believe with faith and freedom. We're gonna make it through.
Welcome to the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup with Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore with DefendingUtah.org. This is the Naked Truth segment where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Today, we'll be talking about what is behind terrorism, what was going on to destroy the Constitution of the state legislature, and much more.
We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, 'cause everything's on the line. We gotta rise up, we gotta stay strong, to save our way of life. I believe in faith.
We'd like to thank our show sponsor, EOS Mobile, the only self-service that supports conservative causes. Today on the Liberty Lineup show, go to EOSCELL.com for more information and mention the Liberty Lineup radio show. Did you know that you can listen to the show from anywhere online through k-talk.com? You can access our calendar and join our chat room. You can also like our Facebook page at K-Talk Utah and post photos at Instagram at K-Talk Radio and tweet our handle at KTKK. And best of all, download the K-Talk app through iTunes or Google Play. Last month alone, K-Talk was heard in 82 countries. Help us spread liberty around the globe. Now today, like I mentioned, we're going to resurrect some history about the Ground Zero Mosque. Remember that one? And what's really going on with terrorism, Enoch? What's going on?
I don't know, but everybody's let's check my mic level. Everybody's certainly got it on their minds right now after Paris, and it's always on our minds. And you know that's the thing. I think the media is really making sure that it's always on our minds. Wouldn't you agree with that?
It is. And why are we talking about it though?
Why are we talking about
It's
it?
defending Utah.
That's a good point. Well, it's on everyone's minds in Utah. And this show we want to really focus on the naked truth, and so we
No matter where it's at.
And so we are,
And it's affecting us because they're talking about not taking refugees. You know, the governor is a part of that. So, I mean, we can see a lot of different aspects, how it affects people listening all across the country, on the internet, and throughout the world, and here in Utah.
yeah. So it's definitely on everyone's minds here in Utah, and we think that we have some valuable sources and information to bring to the discussion, just for the overall picture here. And our guest today, we have a guest, Art Thompson, the CEO of the John Birch Society. Ben, you want to give him a little intro?
Sure. So Art Thompson, he is the CEO of the John Birch Society. He has a long history in the understand and studying the history of America, as well as studying the history of the enemies of freedom. And he is a huge studier, because of all this, of terrorism and documenting what's behind it. And he did a presentation called
Inside the Terror Triangle.
Inside the Terror Triangle, Exposing Terrorism.
I would recommend anyone go on YouTube and look that up.
Art Thompson, Inside the Terror Triangle. You need to watch that on YouTube. And he's owned businesses, started businesses, and he's really solid on the principles of liberty, as well as what the dangers are, knowing really and being able to document what's really going on. And we were able to interview Art Thompson, and we'd like to play some of the clips from that interview.
Let's see. I probably need to put the volume level.
Resettlement
There we go.
program like we have here in the state.
That is.
You need to go to the. Sorry.
Hold on. What else is playing?
Go the other. That one right there and press pause.
Okay. Pause. Can I close it?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, that was not the interview. And let's try again.
Moore and Ben McClintock. I'm Ben McClintock, and we have on the phone our guest, the CEO of the John Birch Society, Art Thompson, and he is an expert on the origins of history and the history of terrorism. And he's also the CEO of the John Birch Society. And Art, you've been a business owner and entrepreneur, and he's a really good background in the principles of liberty as well as understanding these threats. You have the video presentation and the presentation you've given around the country called Inside the Terror Triangle, and talking about the origins and the things behind the terrorism that we're facing. Can you give us some background on that presentation? An overview of it?
Sure. What we're trying to do is to get people to understand that what they see is not what they get. Terror is a state-sponsored entity. It is rarely ever done by individuals or squads that are independent of something much higher. You know, many years ago, the Senate of the United States and the House and the FBI and the Attorney General and a number of entities did studies on terrorism. And they all came to the conclusion that it was state-sponsored. And because you take a look at who supplies these people with weapons, first of all. Where do they get their weapons? Where do they get their money to get the weapons, to get the oil fields, to get the money? But nobody thinks back before they said, well, they get their money from the oil fields.
So who made the initial investment, what you're saying?
That's right. And they are trained, and who trains them? Now, the thing is that everybody, right across the board, back in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, all agreed that it was right out of Moscow, that all of this terrorism was state-sponsored from Russia. Suddenly, we're told that communism is dead and the terrorism continues on with the same training camps, with the same kinds of weaponry, with the same kind of munitions and training camps and techniques. But then we're told that, well, wait a minute, communism is dead. They no longer have anything to do with this. It is now Muslim. It's all Muslim. And but one of the things that came out a few years ago that your listeners may recall was Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Litvinenko, who was in the KGB. He came out and exposed the fact that Russia was still behind the terrorism. He said that they had conducted terrorist attacks in Chechnya to give Putin the excuse to invade Chechnya. And they had terrorist attacks in Moscow apartment houses, that kind of thing, blew them up, and blamed it all on the Chechen Muslim rebels. And so, therefore, we have to invade Chechnya. And they do these things over and over and over again. Another thing that he pointed out was that the guy who is now the head of al-Qaeda, al-Zawahiri, was a Russian-trained asset. So the whole guy that's over al-Qaeda today is run out of Moscow. Now, as a reward for this exposure, Russian agents poisoned him in London with radioactive tea. Your listeners may recall that incident. It became, in fact, I think there's a trial that's still going on in England over that. And they bumped him off because he exposed what was really going on. You're not supposed to know who's really behind terrorism. The Russians, by the way, had a history all the way back to Stalin of committing terrorist acts on their own in order to give the Russian Kremlin government the excuse to do something that they want to do. With Stalin, he started a war on terror as a result of a terrorist attack on a train. And he took that and manipulated it into eliminating anyone who was his competition inside the Kremlin. I mean, he bumped off a lot of top Russian leaders, and he did it in the name of a war on terror. And we've seen that happen over and over again. And so the whole idea of terror, by the way, is to react to the people. In other words, to get the people to stand still for something that those who control the terrorists want to happen. In other words, 9/11, they wanted that to happen, and there was a quote that was given by Osama bin Laden that basically said, we did this to turn the United States into an armed camp, where the freedom of the people of the United States would be at an end, because they would have to, what subsequently became TSA and wiretapping and all the rest of it. And that
so
was
it would
the
be
point.
safe to say that the terrorists won with that.
Correct. And so it's always done aimed at the population themselves to give the government more excuse to become totalitarian, whether it's the French, whether it's the Russians, whether it's us or anybody else. Now, if people think that this is Muslim, now it is at the bottom. These guys, these dummies at the bottom, really believe they're going to go to, Mohammedan heaven and have 70 virgins and all that stuff. But if the leaders really believe that, they would be strapping on that stuff and blowing themselves up quicker than the guys that they give orders to, because wouldn't you want to go to heaven and have 70 virgins and fruit and wine and everything else, So these guys really don't believe that stuff. The guys at the top really are not Muslim. They don't more believe in that than the assassins did.
So that is the first little segment of our interview with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society, and his insight into terrorism goes beyond just maybe a current day military intelligence that knows the current terror networks and what they're doing. He's been studying it for decades and decades and knows the history behind. He knows who was behind it in the 60s and the 70s, so he has a really in-depth knowledge of those networks, and so he's speaking to us from that perspective, and I think it's a valuable perspective. In fact, there's a few key points in the interview that we want to emphasize. So the first thing, right, is that it's always state-sponsored.
Terror is a state-sponsored entity. It is rarely ever done by individuals or squads that are independent of something much higher.
So the whole lone wolf theory of terrorism is basically bunk. There's no such thing. Somebody planned, somebody financed, somebody was involved, and he's saying it's extremely rare that there's
especially with the weapons being involved. It's not something you can just go pick up at Cabela's.
Cabela's doesn't have
rocket launchers.
Well, my coupon's not any good then. Anyway, so he's going through this history to show what's really behind it. Are we bothered about terrorism? We want to stop it. All right, so that this is a branches and a root problem, right? If you go after the branches, you're never going to get to the problem. You have to go after the root to stop it, and so you have to have a full understanding of the big picture. Looks like we have a break, actually.
This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore on the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup, where we focus on right and wrong, not right and left. We'll be right back with more of Art Thompson on what's really behind terrorism and what we can do about it. This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of Defending Utah. We're back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, with the Liberty Lineup, the Naked Truth segment, where we talk about right and wrong, not right and left, sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. And before we went on the break, we've been talking with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society about what are the origins of terrorism, and we have to understand what those origins are to really know what we can do about it. So let's go back to that, Enoch.
Okay, so he made a statement where he talks about the purpose of terrorism, right? It's all about the reaction. I'm going to play that short clip.
The whole idea of terror, by the way, is to react to people. In other words, to get the people to stand still for something that those who control the terrorists want to happen. In other words, 9/11, they wanted that to happen.
So now we have reports after this France incident of biometric ID cards, right, being pushed in France. We actually had a caller comment on that off the air. And this is the same pattern that's been used throughout history, right? Hitler and the Reichstag fire and Stalin, he mentioned, created the war on terror. In fact, Art Thompson mentioned that.
With Stalin, he started the war on terror as a result of a terrorist attack on a train. And he took that and manipulated it into eliminating anyone who was his competition inside the Kremlin. I mean, he bumped off a lot of top Russian leaders, and he did it in the name of a war on terror.
And I think the old dictionary definitions of terrorism even say governing by terror, right? Which the dictionary definition today has changed. But maybe what might be the most surprising thing that Art said to some listeners was this.
The guys at the top really are not Muslim. They don't more believe in that than the assassins did.
And so we're going to get into more of that in the interview. I know he's going to expand on that. But we're trying to get the big picture. So let's move on with some more of the interview.
If anybody out there who's listening understands what I'm talking about when I talk about assassins, go to the internet. It's the best, quickest way to find it, and study up on the assassins. And now there's a lot of baloney out there, but essentially it was this. The assassins controlled the Middle East plus or minus 1000 A.D., and they got these young Muslims to believe that they were going to be going to Muslim heaven and have the virgins and the wine and everything else if they died in the process of carrying out the master's orders. And he was known as the Old Man on the Mountain and any number of different things. But it was the cult of the knife, and they would commit assassinations, and they believed, and almost all of them died in the process. But they were so hyped up on this stuff that they honestly believed that they were doing something to promote, the Muslim faith. But this, in actuality, was a secret society. The dummies at the bottom who carried out these acts of violence, they got killed in the process. But the higher you went in the secret society, they admitted that this whole religion stuff was baloney. This is simply a power structure, a power struggle. And you are the instrument of this power. The higher you get in the structure, the more power you will be given. Now, they obviously didn't do it and give it to everybody that were their minions. The dumbest ones went out and got themselves killed. But there were a few that figured it out and started moving up the chairs, so to speak. And the assassins was finally broken up during the Crusades, although there are those that claim that it was imported into Europe, but the evidence is very, very sparse. But at any rate, it is reminiscent of what is happening today is reminiscent what the assassins did, plus or minus 1,000.
So you had said that in the video that if people are serious about stopping terrorism, they need to understand these things. So can you speak a little bit to that, to say, okay, so what is it that message you were trying to get across that says if you really want to stop terrorism, you really got to get this concept. Otherwise, what everyone thinks now isn't going to solve the problem. It's kind of what you're leading to.
That's basically it. What they're doing is putting us against one another instead of the real target. I mean, you can stand out on an archery range and see a target out there, and if you never hit the bullseye, you don't win. And the bullseye is understanding really what is behind terrorism. It is actually something, and I know your listeners are not going to believe this initially, but give it time. They do their research. They'll find out it's true. That the terror triad is actually Moscow, Beijing, and Washington, D.C. It is not an accident that our own government had the situation come about where we armed ISIS. We did that on purpose. We weren't being stupid. We didn't make a mistake. It was done on purpose. You know, accident after accident after accident where we arm and even train some of these terrorist leaders, and well, we're sorry, they now have turned, radical on us. Well, they were radical to begin with. They were already vetted. They already knew what they were doing. It's just that most guys that are involved in training them have no clue of what their own leaders in Washington, D.C. are doing relative to arming these people. So we have taken over in many instances what Moscow did in the Middle East. We get these guys in the desert sands all armed and fighting one another and mad at each other. Meanwhile, Putin, Obama, and Xi in China, they know what they're doing and are strategizing to bring the whole Middle East under one government, a regional government called radical Islam, but actually controlled by what we term, and they term themselves, we adopted their term that they call themselves, the New World Order. Yeah, that's
and so when Putin is bombing ISIS and getting all of the people that would normally be on our side to support Putin, it's all a part of a controlled opposition?
That's it. They've got us fighting one another instead of understanding what's really going on that will, in the long run, put us all in chains. I mean, if we're going to fight, how do you fight terrorism? I mean, if you don't have absolute control over every citizen, over every phone, over every gun, over every car, etc., you're not going to be able to stop terrorism. It's just not going to happen. The government cannot protect you. You can only protect yourself. Government only comes in afterwards and picks up the pieces and uses the crisis in order to get more control on you. And that's literally what's going on. And we've got all these Republicans running around saying, we've got to do this and we've got to do that, and say, whoa, wait a minute. What's the price? What is the price of your freedom in this equation? Are you willing to give up your freedom to stop terrorism? That may or may not happen. You know, Benjamin Franklin told us, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said basically if you give up freedom to gain a little temporary security, you're going to lose both your freedom and your security, because there are people that want to rule us. And it must be pretty obvious to anybody today there are people in Washington, D.C. that want to rule us.
Right. So would you say then that anyone who's trying to move us off that target, they're helping the people that want to rule us? They're helping the New World Order that you spoke of. If they're taking us off the target.
That's correct. Now,
So he's telling us the entire endgame strategy for the Middle East of the power brokers behind ISIS and Al-Qaeda and terrorism and all that. He says they're building a regional government. Now, is this not familiar to all of those of us who understand Agenda 21 and free trade and how they're building regional governments throughout the world? You know, the European Union was the first and oldest one now, but the power brokers of the New World Order, as our guest just explained, have selected their favorite, their favorite minions to say, you guys get to manage this region. And so what they're doing is they're just giving all the countries over to them, and that's their goal. This is the regional government on the way to George Bush's New World Order that we've also talked about on this show before. So he said the target. So we're talking about the roots and the branches. Art Thompson is talking about the root. Who is the root? And he said that's the target. You have to focus on the target or everything we do is pointless. And so the target was, he said there's a terror triad behind terrorism.
What they're doing is putting us against one another instead of the real target. I mean, you can stand out on an archery range and see a target out there, and if you never hit the bullseye, you don't win. And the bullseye is understanding really what is behind terrorism. It is actually something, and I know your listeners are not going to believe this initially, but give it time. They do their research. They'll find out it's true. That the terror triad is actually Moscow, Beijing, and Washington, D.C.
And don't many of us already know this? We've seen Ben Swann's report on the origins of ISIS. And Ben, you've seen that report?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we know, we've seen all these little events where we've been shown we were running guns and we were doing all this and arming our enemies. To me, it's a surprise that it's not commonly accepted knowledge now that, like, oh yeah, ISIS, yeah, that's us.
Well, you got the
our
videos
intelligence.
all over the place that shows U.S. helicopters guarding trains of these Toyota trucks being driven by ISIS.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
It's clear that we're not just in the past that we were helping them out, but that we continue to support them. And you've got pictures of John McCain and others with ISIS leaders. It should be obvious to anybody actually looking at it, as opposed to falling for what's really, for what the CNN and Fox News are telling you.
So if we wanted to stop terrorism, we have to focus on the root, but instead they have us looking at the wrong place.
They've got us fighting one another instead of understanding what's really going on that will, in the long run, put us all in chains.
So if we keep looking at the wrong target, he's saying, Art Thompson says, that's in the long run just going to put us all in chains. So we need to know who's taking us off target, who is not calling out the New World Order, who that is behind these terror networks. And in the meantime, they will continue to use these crises to increase power and gain more control over us.
Government only comes in afterwards and picks up the pieces and uses the crisis in order to get more control on you. How do you fight terrorism? I mean, if you don't have absolute control over every citizen, over every phone, over every gun, over every car, etc., you're not going to be able to stop terrorism.
So absolute control. That's the only way we can legitimately fight terrorism if we're really going to fight it with the terrorists instead of looking at the root of the problem. So we have a caller. Ben, can you take that call?
Yeah.
He has a question about London. Caller,
Eagle,
are you there?
Yeah, this is Eagle. I'm still here. Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Sure.
You mentioned Beijing, Washington, and the capital of Russia.
Yeah.
Which is that?
Moscow, yeah.
Yeah, Moscow. But it's not a triad, it's a quadrad. You're not mentioning the city of London.
Sure. So the city of London, right, kind of has some similarities with Washington, D.C. and the Vatican in that they're
It's kind of like one and the same.
Yeah, they're separate nation. They're kind of separate nation states, even though they're cities. So I hear what you're saying. I would think that I would kind of group that into Washington, D.C. as far as the terror triad goes, right? But otherwise, you're right, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, and I can understand. I can probably agree with what you're saying. Now, let me just ask you this. I assume that you understand the validity of the date 9/11.
I've seen a lot of theories and numerology and things that really didn't help me solve a problem or understand anything.
It's got no numerology to it. That is a Masonic date, and big things like 9/11 in our country some 15 years ago fall on that date.
That's possible.
What I'm saying is these people belong to these secret societies such as the Masonic orders. Hey, they are in on the take.
Appreciate the call. Appreciate your comments. Thanks,
Thank
Eagle.
you.
Thanks,
Call
Eagle.
back anytime.
You know, it is interesting. Art Thompson talked about, he did mention the secret society, 1,500 years ago. He called the assassins that were basically doing the same thing as terrorism. And it does speak to a secret society behind a lot of this. I don't necessarily know the depth of that, or if that question is even relevant to understand the depth of that, which societies and who and what. But there are definitely some involved in some way. But we know that there is an overarching goal of a new world order, and that was Bush's thing for 2 years on live CNN TV, and it is the official policy of the United States since 1991 to build a new world order, according to their own, we talked about that last week, published documents. So we have a little more. Here, let's ponder this question.
Are you willing to give up your freedom to stop terrorism that may or may not happen. You know, Benjamin Franklin told us, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said basically if you give up freedom to gain a little temporary security, you're going to lose both your freedom and your security.
Okay, we're coming up on a break now, and after the break we will have more from Art Thompson. He's going to talk about the divide and conquer strategy and how that works with the Communist 5-step plan. And I think we have 15 seconds till break.
This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore with the Liberty Lineup. This is the Naked Truth segment where we talk about right and wrong, not right and left. And we were speaking with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society about the origins of terrorism. And understanding the origins of terrorism will help us to understand the solutions and the things that we can actually do about it, so we're not falling for the government line that we have to give up more of our liberties to protect our security. We'll be right back on the Liberty Lineup. This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore, and we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, with the Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment, sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. And we're talking with Art Thompson, of the CEO of the John Birch Society, about the origins of terrorism, how it's state-sponsored and it's directed to get us to change our activities. And as we allow them to get us to give up our liberties for our security, we actually we're actually letting the terrorists win. And so it's really important that we understand these principles of who we talked about the triad, how it's this terrorist network is actually sponsored by the Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. And we can get back into the
and so hacking away at the branches of going after just terrorists or just who we think the terrorists are is ineffective, because they're not the ones pulling the strings and calling the shots. And the ones calling the shots are not even Muslim. And that's one of the most significant things. Let's find that clip.
The guys at the top really are not Muslim. They don't more believe in that than the assassins did.
So we're going to talk about the divide and conquer strategy with Art Thompson next.
You mentioned the 60s. In the 60s, the John Birch Society came out with the video Anarchy USA, which lists the steps for a revolution to take over. And one of those steps, and you mentioned it in your article about the mosque at the Ground Zero Mosque, is the divide and conquer strategy. And so how is that divide and conquer strategy being applied here with terrorism?
Well, the divide and conquer strategy is simply first of all, the way it's implemented in the Middle East is that they're getting these guys divided in the Middle East between various factions of Islam, aren't they? I mean, right there, between the Sunnis and the Shiites, and et cetera. So they're dividing the moderates and the radicals, and then they're radicalizing even the various the segments of the Muslim world to fight each other. Behind the scenes, there's an awful lot going on between the various factions of the Muslim religion. And no American can really understand what's going on without understanding that. I mean, some of these guys are spending literally billions of dollars a year for a future holy war in the Middle East itself. Between the various Muslim factions. So that's a divide and conquer situation going on right there. Another one is in the United States between those that want to just bomb these people to death and those that don't want to bomb them. Between Republicans and Democrats, between neocon conservatives and libertarians and everything else. Nobody can get together on all this stuff. You take a look at even the Republican candidates running for office, what have you got? You got a situation where nobody is getting a majority simply because they are so divided on what the solutions are. And so they're using terrorism to even have a greater solution of going back into the Middle East. And if they're denying they want boots on the ground, you better believe that somewhere down the road, putting boots back on the ground. That's just the way it is.
They're not already there now.
And, well, yeah, but just a few. I mean, big on a bigger scale.
Gotcha.
The other thing is, too, what do they? If you take a look at the papers, even today, I've got one right here. Let me dig it out. It's got a very interesting headline on it, because what is happening is that in the name of terror against the Russians, you know, that plane that got shot down?
Right.
Okay, here in Russia, this is in USA Today on page 3A. This is the title of the article. Russian strikes in Syria could lead to cooperation with U.S. That's what we really want, is a cooperation between the United States and Putin, isn't it? I mean, but there are people, there are conservatives out there that honestly believe that Putin's a moral, decent guy. I mean, I just don't get it, but that's the way it is.
So that was arranged to lead to that outcome?
Oh, I think so. I mean, after all, I just told you about that one committee,
right?
And that it was produced by Putin, and it's both a Russian wing and an American wing. And when you got the leader of the terrorist camps in the Russian wing and Henry Kissinger in the American wing, boy, I'm telling you, you're in for a lot of trouble. And you're seeing some of the candidates that are running for president sitting down having lunch with Henry Kissinger.
Right, well,
and you know, they're going to the throne, you know, so to speak.
One of the candidates, Rand Paul, is drafted legislation to declare war on ISIS. What does that even mean if we started it?
Well,
war on ourselves.
We have never had an enemy since the end, since even including World War II, but particularly since the end of World War II, we've never had an enemy that we did not produce, that we did not arm, that we did not train. None of them. And whether you're talking about Ho Chi Minh, whether you're talking about Saddam Hussein or anything else, we trained those guys. We gave them the equipment. We built them up. We helped them come to power.
So is a war on ISIS a distraction?
Well, the war on ISIS will be something that. Well, first of all, what is ISIS? Does anybody really know? I mean, we had ISIS didn't exist 3 years ago. Suddenly, it's supplanted Al Qaeda. And they say now that Al Qaeda isn't important, but you cannot believe what you read in the newspapers anymore. It's all the same stuff all the time. You know, this is our enemy today, this is our enemy tomorrow, and they've got us going and turning around in every which direction.
So Art Thompson there is really laying out this divide and conquer strategy, and then he talks about the enemies that were being divided and conquered for the purpose of being rallied against an enemy, which he explained we've never had an enemy that we didn't create ourselves since World War II, but he even kind of said World War II is kind of was as well. But that is the implications of what that means is so important for understanding what we do about terrorism and who we focus on and who we blame. And if we blame the wrong people, then as Art said earlier, we're just going to end up enslaving ourselves, because that's what they're trying to get us to do, is to blame the wrong people, to divide us.
We have never had an enemy since the end, since even including World War II, but particularly since the end of World War II, we've never had an enemy that we did not produce, that we did not arm, that we did not train.
What were you thinking there, Ben?
Well, just that you talked about what we do, and what we do meaning what we, meaning not the U.S. If the U.S. is a part of that, obviously, we mean we as individuals. Are we going to be, as the listeners, are we going to be promoting the hysteria? Are we going to be a part of that hysteria that's being passed around by our government through its agents in the media? And so understanding those things.
Crazy. We have we have a call, an interesting caller. Says he wants to talk about something he saw in Vietnam. This could be interesting. Let's take this caller. Anonymous, not the anonymous, not the hackers. He's just anonymous on the call. Caller, welcome to the show. You there? We put him on the air.
Caller, you there?
Oh, did we lose the caller? Okay, we'll try him again in a second. So Ben, I agree with that. We're talking about what we want to do ourselves. Oh, did we get the caller back on?
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. Caller.
Yes, this is the Eagle. This is not who you're trying to get on another line.
Oh, okay.
But I want to talk with your guest, who I think is very knowledgeable. I hope he understands what I'm talking about, that I experienced.
This is a pre-recorded interview, so I'm sorry you couldn't ask him something, but feel free to go ahead and share.
Okay. Well, when I was in Vietnam in 1968, I witnessed what was called the Phoenix Program. And I didn't know what it was until I got back home 20 years ago. A fellow explained it to me. But it was run by the CIA in the billets where I stayed, and the guy that ran it was a CIA operative that had spent time here in Salt Lake and where I live. And every Thursday morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning, they would go out and they would find the heads of the villages and the hamlets where these villages and hamlets had been pacified, and meaning that they were then pro-American, and they would take them and they would basically interview them, and then they'd summarily take them out and shoot them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were killing our own friends. And I viewed it, but I didn't have a name for the program. Got back here in Utah, and a fellow explained it to me 20 years ago. And so we are our own worst enemy, are we not?
For sure. This actually, you're not the only one that's had similar experiences. There's another individual that was in Korea, and they were on a top secret mission that nobody knew where they were. Nobody knew where they were.
I know the man. Yeah. I know him.
And
we've talked about it many times.
And he talked about how all of a sudden they were in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden these lights show up on them, and these North Korean troops start listing off the names of everybody there. And it's because that our government is involved in treason.
That's intelligence going through the UN to other nations. So this is the global government managing these wars like puppet masters.
Exactly.
Now, where did you hear that story? Did you hear it from the man himself?
I heard it from Mr. Lindsay himself, yes.
Yep. Dean's a friend of mine. Is he still alive?
Yes, he is.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hey, I appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling. So we have only a little bit more time before our next break, but I want to review this part of Art's interview. So when you want to talk about that, it's not Islamic at the top of the chain. He had some specific examples of people who converted to Islam that were former communists at the time of the fall of Russia.
And if you go back and you take a look at these guys that used to be in the streets, remember the Burn terrorists, the Stokely Carmichaels of the 60s and 70s?
Right.
Well, the minute that communism disappeared, supposedly, those guys stopped being communists and became imams.
So we're going to have to head to a break real quick, but special thanks to our show sponsor, EOS Mobile, the cell phone service that supports conservative candidates and causes. Go to EOSCELL.com for more information and mention the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of DefendingUtah.org. We'll be back the next hour with more of Art Thompson on What's Behind Terrorism. For more of the Liberty Lineup's Thursday show, The Naked Truth, where we talk about right and wrong, not right and left.
I believe with faith and free.
Welcome to the Thursday segment of the Liberty Lineup Show with Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore from defendingutah.org. This is the Naked Truth segment where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Today, we've been talking with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society about what's really going on with terrorism and what we can do about it. Continue on with that.
We gotta rise up. We gotta stay strong.
We'd like to thank our show sponsor, EOS Mobile, the only cell phone service that supports conservative candidates and causes. Go to EOSCELL.com for more information and mention the Liberty Lineup radio show. Did you know that you can listen to this show from anywhere online through k-talk.com? You can also access our calendar and join our chat room. You can also like our Facebook page at K-Talk Radio and post photos to Instagram at K-Talk Radio and tweet our handle at KTKK. And best of all, download the K-Talk app through iTunes or Google Play. Last month, K-Talk was heard in 82 countries. Help us spread liberty around the globe. We've been talking with, we've been playing our pre-recorded interview with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society. We'll be getting into that, as well as some things with the Ground Zero Mosque, as well as some things that were going on at the Capitol last week. And we really want to get back to this because...
And we do have some really neat things about the Ground Zero Mosque that is sort of revisiting history and some things that were not exposed at the time, at least not widely if they were.
Exactly. It's because right now, especially whenever these things hit, every single time they use the aftermath right afterwards to get us to think emotionally and to act emotionally as opposed to really get down to what's going on, and so that we can actually make a proper diagnosis, which allows us to make a proper solution. If you're acting on emotion, you can't do either one of those things.
And just like Art Thompson said, you could be in an archery range, and if you're not shooting at the target, you're never going to hit it, ever. And so when we're acting emotionally, that's when the news comes on and says, he did it, right?
Right.
And you're like, oh, my goodness, he did it. Shoot over there, right? And you will never get to who the controllers are behind the problem.
Yep.
Right. So we have Art Thompson now, who's going to discuss what we need to actually do about it. We asked him that question, and here's what he had to say.
You know, this is our enemy today, this is our enemy tomorrow, and they've got us going and turning around in every which direction.
And so what should our direction be? Where should our focus as Americans be?
Our focus as Americans should be this. We have got to stop going out there and arming everybody and just stepping back and say, wait a minute, what is really going on here? Who are the people responsible for arming these terrorists? And punish them. You know, we have never, ever held any of these people accountable. You know, if we left all that equipment in the Middle East, who left it? Who was responsible for giving the orders to put that stuff there and then walk away from it and allow them to take it? We have to start looking at the individuals in our government who are doing this thing to our own men and women in uniform, because they're the guys who are going to have to pay the price in the long run. And so we just simply have to step back and say, wait a minute, let's take a look at what is this, like this Benghazi business. You know, there was far more to this Benghazi thing than what has come out. Right. That Benghazi operation was a war between two factions of radical Muslim, because they were running they were running guns through the American ambassador in Benghazi. And there's a lot of stuff we have not printed that we know, but we can't print it because we can't get absolute proof, because there's no access to Libya anymore. But we've had people come out of Libya telling us all sorts of things. Keep in mind that Libya was taken over by Al-Qaeda, right?
Right.
I mean, that's okay. Well, now they say it's ISIS. Would you please make up your mind? This is the thing that you know, it's over and over and over again. We're told from month to month that we've got a different enemy, and it just keeps all the American public confused. And they
that really speaks to what you're saying, speaks to how so much of this is just staged and set up for us, right?
Well, it is. Too much of it is staged. Now, that doesn't mean that the terrorist at the bottom of the whip, at the outer end of the whip, isn't really a terrorist. I mean, he really honestly believes that he's doing what he's doing because it's for Islam and all the rest of it. But his handlers do not.
Right.
His handlers do not. The guys that train them, the guys that arm them, they're not stupid enough to go out and get themselves killed.
If it wasn't for these New World Order agents directing the suicide bombings, do you think that those people that are doing the suicide bombings, would kind of just be living their life?
Well, no, if they were raised right and that they weren't radicalized, like I said, Stokely Carmichael and those kinds of people became imams. Those are the people in the mosques that are riling a lot of people up. Now, every other country has its imams. You talk about all these beheadings and everything else that they showed on television, that's nothing. They used to do that in Algeria, and everybody knew that those terrorists in Algeria back in the 1950s were right out of Moscow, and they used to do the same thing.
In one of your presentations, you're talking about beheadings, and you were mentioning how the beheadings just south of the border of the United States kind of made the ones in the Middle East look like small time.
That's correct, and I don't recommend it. But I can tell you that if you went on the internet and looked at beheadings in Mexico, you would be scarred for the rest of your life by what you would see come up in the way of photographs and video of what's going on in Mexico. And it pales, the Middle East pales compared to what's going on in Mexico. And you don't hear a word about it in the media. But what's coming across the southern border is far worse relative to terrorism than what any of these Syrian refugees are coming into the country. Now, I'm not apologizing for the Syrian refugees. I don't think they should come into the country.
So that's quite telling. Just the implications of every minute of this interview are just profound.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Ben?
That's why we wanted to have him on, because if you see his presentation on the Terror Triangle, I mean, it's going to blow your mind about what's really going on, what are the origins, and and how we're being fooled to support things that will destroy our liberties.
And he talks about these former communists, quote former communists like Stokely Carmichael and H. Rat Brown, these guys that everybody knew. Oh yeah, they were communists back in the day, and how they just, as soon as communism was, quote, dead, they just coincidentally at the same time became imams, and they kind of started this Nation of Islam movement, which was just a communist movement that they just kind of grabbed onto. It reminds me of a quote from a book. I think it's
different than the Nation of Islam with Farrakhan, but the same, but the idea of a nation state.
The idea of using religion,
right,
then at that point.
Right.
So, and Art Thompson actually gave us some quotes about Moscow saying we're going to use religion and we're going to continue our revolution, but we're going to pretend to be Muslim. And I have that quote. I don't have it with me, but Art Thompson gave that to us.
Yeah.
It was from the 1980s. But it also reminds me of a quote from a book that says, men could not be punished for their beliefs, therefore they pretended to preach according to their belief.
Exactly.
Stokely Carmichael and those kinds of people became imams. Those are the people in the mosques that are riling a lot of people up.
So who's doing the radicalizing? It's these communists.
Yeah.
That's what's behind it all. They are the ones doing the radicalizing, the communists. You take the communists out of the picture, there's no one organizing this large-scale radicalization of anyone.
It's maybe something hard to grasp, because as we understand that communism itself is a tool, is a branch, basically, is a subdivision of the greater
New World Order.
Right. And so the New World Order is directing the communists to direct to infiltrate these other groups. Just like in the United States, you have a lot of different communists infiltrating Christian churches. So depending on it just depends on what the greatest influence is in that area. So in America, they're going to try to infiltrate Christian churches. In the Middle East, they're going to try and infiltrate Muslim religion. It just depends on where you're at.
So briefly, before we have a few minutes to the break, that's just long enough to start this clip. I think this is going to touch on Art Thompson commenting on the Ground Zero Mosque, and then we've got some other information to bring forth about that. But let's continue that clip of the interview.
With the kind of wanted to get into the mosque, in your article you talked about sometimes a lot of people are misunderstanding the message and how the mosque is really a part of the divide and conquer. Enoch has done some research on what was behind that. Maybe the two of you can kind of talk about how that's being used as divide and conquer.
So what we saw was from some WikiLeaks emails that came out of Stratford Global Intelligence, things that had leaked online. This independent security research company was discussing the mosque, and they talked about the imam there. That mosque was an FBI asset. So that was actually the vice president of Stratford Global Intelligence, Fred Burton, who said, yes, that imam is an operational asset of the FBI. And so it raises the question, all these people who were saying, stop the mosque, down with the mosque, and they're bringing Sharia law here right now, and we got to stop those Muslims. What are they saying, that we're going to stop the FBI? Was that a rally against the FBI? It's kind of the same question, right? Is declaring war on ISIS, declaring war against ourselves? So what does that say about that mosque and the purpose of that mosque, and was it really even a problem?
Well, that's a good question. We have had instances, and I was on the end of it one time myself, many years ago, where the government tried to sent in a guy into a group I was associated with to try and radicalize us into a bank robbery team. And we had city council members, we had responsible people in this organization. We just told this guy, what is wrong with you? Please leave. Later on, about a year later, we discovered that this guy worked for the government and was trying to get us to do some pretty radical things. And so this is not something new. Sometimes it's done by rogue individuals in our government, and sometimes it's actually from the very top of the government trying to get things done.
So this is huge. I mean, we've got WikiLeaks documents that are showing that this Ground Zero Mosque was a part of an operation of the FBI. And it looks like it falls under the whole divide and conquer technique that's used to bring in a revolution.
I think that's exactly what it falls under, and we've got even more background on that after the break.
This has been McClintock and Enoch Moore. After the break, we're going to go into that some more detail. The Ground Zero Mosque was an operation of the FBI. Right after the break. This has been McClintock and Enoch Moore, and we're back on K-Talk Radio AM 630 K-Talk.com. The Liberty Lineup Naked Truth segment where we talk about right and wrong, not right and left, sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. And we've been talking with Art Thompson of the John Birch Society about the origins of terror, what governments use it for, and that governments are actually this terrorism is always state-sponsored. How do they get the initial funding to start what they're doing?
Is always state-sponsored. They're rarely ever organic and individual, and there's always a purpose for it. The intended purpose is to create a reaction in people,
right,
in order to adjust policy. And
you've got to think emotionally. We have to get you thinking emotionally is what the goal is.
And then Art's been speaking to the divide and conquer and about how none of this is Muslim at the top. They radicalize gullible individuals at the lower level, but at the top, none of those leaders believe that at all, especially if you go all the way to the top and you got the New World Order folks. These are the guys that, like George Bush and so forth, right?
Right.
Stokely Carmichael and those kinds of people became imams. Those are the people in the mosques that are riling a lot of people up.
Art Thompson speaking to the fact that these former communists of the 60s all just decided to become imams so that they could try to rile people up and hide under the banner of a given local religion, depending on what part of the world they're in. But we have a few more minutes from the interview, and he kind of speaks to more of the bigger picture and who the guys are at the top of the chain, and we'll just let that speak for itself here.
You know, Lyndon Johnson, for instance, was not a very nice guy. I don't know if you know much about his background or not, but there was a lot of criminality connected with the whole business of getting him into the Senate of the United States. It involved deaths in the Texan desert and everything else. Everett Haley wrote a book about it. A Texan Looks at Lyndon, and documented a lot of that stuff. And so the idea that we would not have individuals in our government that might be a problem is just it's just wishful thinking. We've had members of the Ku Klux Klan, for instance, who've been president of the United States. A lot of people don't know that. Harry Truman, I don't know if you knew that or not, but he was a member of the KKK. So we've had people, in government that have had some very unsavory backgrounds, and they are not above using various government agencies to eliminate their political opposition. It's just that simple. And some of these people have this New World Order idea behind what they're trying to do, and they've gotten into our government and have been manipulating our government for years. For instance, the Department of State, since the Second World War, I think with only one or two exceptions, one for sure, two maybe, the Secretaries of State have been members of the Council on Foreign Relations, whose aim it is a New World Order. And they've put in their undersecretaries, they've hired staff, and a lot of that staff never left. Because, you hire civil servants, you can't get rid of them hardly.
Sure. I didn't know that about Truman and the KKK.
So this is the thing, is that you got to really look at the background of these people and say to yourself, just what is going on, and take. That's part of the problem that we have in the John Birch Society. We name names. That's what gets us in trouble. We say, hey, it isn't simply Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. These guys belong to some of the same clubs, and they're just pretending to be what they claim to be. And you've got to look at what they stand for, besides what they publicly state, just like Boehner. I get up on the Hill periodically, and I like to inform some of these representatives just what's going on, because they don't look much beyond their nose either. Boehner was involved, for instance, in an organization that wants to merge the United States with the European Union. That is its goal. And so then you wonder why he is doing certain things the way he's doing them. It's because he has a different agenda than everybody else. And so these are the things that Americans need to study. Is there a conspiracy? Well, I don't know. Just think about it logically. People make things happen. People dream up ideas. People finance ideas. People plan ideas. People implement ideas. Nothing happens in politics that wasn't planned that way, according to Franklin Roosevelt. And that's what Americans have to understand, is that this coterie of individuals in the United States, in league with others around the world, are trying to move us irrepressibly towards a single world government controlled by them. Once that happens, it's going to be very difficult for the average American to have any freedom whatsoever, because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So
we definitely agree with that. So it sounds like we need to be focusing on who the arsonists are instead of all the fires that they're setting, from the way you're describing
it. That's basically it. That's a good way of putting it. That's a very good way of putting it. And if you take a look at the backgrounds, you study where all these. First of all, start looking at where do terrorists get their weapons. Where do they get them? and then trace it back, and that's going to tell you more than anything else.
Thank you, Art, for your time. And is there any things you want to say about the John Birch Society before we let you go?
Well, the one thing I will say is that anybody that's interested in any issue of the day and what they can learn and do about it, go to jbs.org, jbs.org, like John Birch Society, only .org. And we have a very robust website. You can find out just about anything you need to know about what's going on in the world today and the United States. But the key is, so what do you do about it? So you know something, so what? You don't want to be the most informed individual in a concentration camp, telling everybody in line, I told you so. It doesn't work. You got to do something about it. So with that, jbs.org, and thanks for having me on.
So Ben, are you going to be informed when you're in the concentration camp?
I want to be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. I mean, these are some principles that we should really take to heart. We don't want to be just information junkies and say, I'm the smartest guy in the concentration camp.
So Art Thompson really just laid out a little more of who that was behind terrorism. He talks about the Council on Foreign Relations and, many other unsavory characters in our government. He even talked about Lyndon Johnson. I didn't know that before this interview. Lyndon Johnson was KKK. So there is much more to meets the eye than what the news and the TV tell you, and even many bloggers. And we have to know this big picture so that we know we don't fall for just the false division tactic that is pummeled at us constantly. And we have a caller we want to take, but after the caller, then we'll talk a little more about what Art was mentioning with the Ground Zero Mosque. But let's get the caller.
Ivan or Hiven?
Are you there, caller?
Hello, caller.
Wait, says he's still waiting on hold. Okay, now do it. There you
go.
Caller.
Ivan.
Oh, that's a lot better. I was on the ground for a while. Yeah, I couldn't hear nothing but you saying that.
Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
What was the name of your guest? I forgot.
Art Thompson.
Art Thompson. Mr. Art Thompson. I come from behind the Iron Curtain, and I discovered a lot of things that I didn't know there then,
Yeah.
But the question I have for you now, if they wanted really to design this global world order, why are they allowing now that act of terrorism in Europe when it's so fragile, the union there? That's my first question. What was the purpose to create some of these Eastern European countries, starting with Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Latvia, Estonia, they don't want any refugees. And they're really close to say the hell with the union. I just wonder what's wrong with this timing and what was the purpose. And these globalists, they really wanted to achieve what they wanted. And then the other question I have, let's see. Ask me this question, and then I'll
Art's not with us. I'm sorry. That was actually a pre-recorded interview. But I think if following the same principles, it's really about getting control, getting an emotional reaction to be able to get us to join together and to fall for these solutions of a coordinated effort and putting people together to share intelligence that they wouldn't normally share.
And rallying people behind this common enemy. So when you divide the people, then the purpose of that is to
I'm familiar with the Hegelian dialect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good.
I'm familiar with that. And then, too bad that the guy's not there, because I was going to ask him a very embarrassing question that I don't know. I can ask you, but I don't think you can answer. There's hardly any organization today, even the John Birch Society drifted away from original intent because it got penetrated and it got punished. There was I forgot the name escaped me. But there was a guy that when he made a comment about the Jews' involvement, he was fired, and ever since the organization kind of changed.
Yeah, I guess we could speak to that or what's going on. I know that
we talked about being fired for. I appreciate the call. I
have one more thing.
But that aspect, they've always been an organization that didn't blame groups of people. You don't say all Jews did this. You don't say all blacks did that. That's kind of a collectivist mindset.
And that is the divide and conquer.
That's the divide and conquer, and that's something. And you say they got away from their original. That isn't getting away from their original, because Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, he wrote about that being a divide and conquer tactic. And so I would say that you might be a little bit mistaken right there with that one.
Let me pose you a question. Any of you read the last book of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, 200 Years Together?
That one I didn't read, but I read his other ones.
Maybe you got to read, because that's a great contribution to the Solzhenitsyn, to the base view of the world.
Definitely.
And that book deals about involvement in the Jews of forming the Soviet Union and all that stuff. And this role that the Jew played, it's not a small role.
Well, we think there's corruption among multiple groups across the world. So focusing ever on one group is really just actually.
I'm not focusing. You got to read me right. I'm not focusing to blame the Jews for all the trouble in the world, but I'm blaming some elements. I mean, some segments of that Jerusalem, especially the Zionist Jew, that date from the time of Bakunin. And they're the first one that invented the terrorism, and this fact is ignored largely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of history that gets ignored in general, and we appreciate your call.
Yeah, but that's an aspect of it that that we really have to understand. Once you become a part of this, it's a satanic conspiracy, and once you reject your religion and you become a Satanist, just like we talked about how John Huntsman and
John Huntsman Jr. in the New World Order,
and the New World Order, and the other guy that Brent Scowcroft, they claim to be Mormons, but they're not.
They've signed on to the New World Order,
which means they're now Satanists, and so you can find those in Jews, you can find those in Mormons, you can find those in Catholics. It's again
and all across the board.
All across the board. Once you join the New World Order, you're now a Satanist.
There are people who strongly believe, this group is behind it, or this group is behind it, or that one, but those are really misinformation plans for the divide and conquer, instead of looking at the whole group as a whole.
Right. But and that gets us into the what we were getting at with the
divide and
FBI,
conquer, the mosque, right?
With the mosque and the FBI.
So we have just a couple minutes till break, actually, but we'll just get into this. So some research that Defending Utah did, the mosque, the Ground Zero Mosque, was of 2010, was headed by an imam called Faisal Abdul Rauf, and that is the guy who is a verified FBI operating asset. And this guy was also part of a security firm called Patriot Defense Group. And so all the money for this mosque was coming from this guy. And him and all his buddies in Patriot Defense Group, they're full of the U.S. State Department, Special Forces, and Secret Service under Presidents Bush and Clinton, former deputy director of the CIA, all these guys were his associates. And this is the type of person who was funding the mosque. So it was an FBI asset, and the money is coming from these insider-type intelligence and security type individuals, and this guy who was funding him, his name was R. Leslie Deek. His father as well was former OSS, who actually his company fell because he was caught laundering money for Colombian drug lords. And so there's all these interesting connections, and we built an infographic, and we're going to put it up. It's not up yet, but we're going to put it up on defendingutah.org and show you that there is just this immense insider connection and financing for this group, a Cordoba initiative, that was doing the mosque at Ground Zero. And so it just it raises a lot of questions. And where are we at? Is this our break?
We're getting on there.
We're on a break.
This has been McClintock and Enoch Moore. After the break, we'll be getting more into the divide and conquer, especially with that Ground Zero Mosque and how it was funded by it was a FBI operation. We'll be right back on the Liberty Lineup. This has been McClintock and Enoch Moore back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com with the Liberty lineup, The Naked Truth, Think Right and Wrong, Not Right and Left. Sponsored by EOS Mobile, the cell phone service for conservatives. We've been discussing, right before we went on the break, talking about how the Ground Zero Mosque, through leaked documents we were able to obtain from the WikiLeaks documents that showed that it was actually an operation of the FBI and had funding. The whole operation was done through these different intelligence agencies.
And this matches everything that we've just heard from Art Thompson, right, who's been explaining that terrorism is not Islamic at the top or middle management and up. It's only at the very bottom. And this matches that information perfectly. The Ground Zero Mosque, and it was being built by an FBI operating asset and funded by a whole bunch of insiders in secretive military defense contractors and that sort of thing. And we will publish an infographic on that probably within the next week at defendingutah.org, but it is not up yet. But it's funny, this imam was Bush's favorite imam. Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf worked for George W. Bush, leading propaganda efforts in the Middle East. So he was a propaganda artist in the Middle East for George Bush, and now he's doing what? More propaganda in the United States, which is interesting. So we should be focusing on the target in this situation. We shouldn't have been saying, stop those Muslims from building the mosque. We should have been saying, stop the FBI from pretending to build a mosque, right?
To create the divide and conquer.
That was the target that Art Thompson talked about. If you don't know the target, you'll miss it every single time. And so you got to ask who's taking us off of the targets.
So would you say then that anyone who's trying to move us off that target, they're helping the people that want to rule us? They're helping the New World Order that you spoke of. If they're taking us off the target.
That's correct.
That's right. So if we never hit the target, then they're safe. They can keep doing whatever they want, and that's kind of the key to understanding. So who spearheaded the effort to, quote, stop the mosque? And were they saying, stop the FBI, stop this false media campaign? They were saying, no, the Muslims are coming, and they're building a mosque, when we now have documented evidence that it was not them. And that was blogger Pamela Geller, and so we had asked her that question of why did you not point to who was really behind the mosque? And, you know, perhaps she did stop the mosque. She made a phone call. I can just imagine this. She made a phone call and said, hi, is this the FBI, CIA? Oh, great. You can stop the mosque now because everyone loved me. And so what was she advocating then instead? Well, she was advocating against you know, the mosque coming in. So here's the kind of the attitude she took.
Look, the most basic primitive honor a nation owes to its dead is to fight to defend itself, to defeat the enemy and win.
So she's focusing on the enemy. Oh, look, here's an enemy in our country. The enemy wasn't the false idea of, you know, the FBI doing it. She's saying, oh, yeah, she's pointing, she's moving the target right there. And so that is the concern there. And let's see, we have a call. Wants to talk about abomination. What does that even mean? Should we take a call?
Just real quick. You there, Jason?
I am. How's my friends with Defending Utah?
Fantastic. What's up?
So, you know, just to let you know that this is your friend Jason Christensen,
yep.
County Chairman of the Independent American Party.
Good to have you.
What's up?
So, you know, what Arthur was talking about, he is absolutely correct on the conspiracy from within.
Mm-hmm.
But what most people don't know is that here in the state of Utah, the Republicans in the state are just as bought and paid for by these secret combinations as well. Especially, you know, either if it's deceiving the public about calling for monetary constitutional convention, or if it's legalizing gender-neutral locker rooms in the state of Utah.
Yeah, we totally agree with that. We actually got some quotes from the recent constitutional convention's game that they're playing with us. Thanks for calling, Jason. And so you're right about them being local, and we can kind of move on to that little bit of our show here. We did some interviews at this constitutional convention that was happening. Well, it's a preparatory constitutional convention. And Ben, you want to talk about that a little bit, what you did, and then I can play any of these clips you want to play.
Okay. So last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we talked a little bit about it last week. There was a meeting of a private organization called the Assembly of State Legislatures, meeting supposedly to come together and come up with rules for a convention. And they had legislators from 21 states. And we kind of played some of the goofiness that was going on last week. I mean, we played it last week. And so if you want to go on to our defendingutah.org, you can check out those clips. But I went there, and we were able to witness some of the things that were going on. And behind the scenes, we were able to do some interviews. We interviewed we'll just kind of go through the individual ones of what Representative Larry Snow from St. George had to say. I asked him about what he thought that the reasons were for the meeting that they were having.
The setting up the rules.
The preliminary emphasis for this group is to create a framework, a structure, rules that would govern how that convention would be actually handled if it were successful. And the reason we think that's important is most of the pushback on holding a convention is related to this idea that there is no structure of how business would be conducted, how voting would occur.
Okay, so he's admitting that the concern is that there is no structure. Okay, so he's admitting that that's a structure, and that's why they're having the meeting, is to come up with the structure. Okay, so, and then I ask him about, go ahead and play the next clip.
So if these rules are adopted, are they binding upon any Article 5 convention?
They're really not.
Okay, so the whole reason why they had the meeting was to come up with these rules, and then, but so are the rules binding? No, they're not binding. So what were they doing there? If they were setting up these rules to get because they said that they needed that because the big opposition to this was that there were no rules, and that's because Article 5 doesn't lay out the rules, and he admits that. And so they're giving a show to pretend to come up with rules to get people to go along with their program. But when directly asked, is there any bindingness to these rules, he says no. Okay, so now we can say, well, then how are these delegates even chosen?
How are the delegates here chosen?
Each state legislature appoints a number of delegates through their leader of their respective house. So
everyone here from Utah, Greg Hughes appointed you to come here?
Greg appointed members of the House, and Senator Niederhauser, President of the Senate, appointed those who are official delegates from the Senate.
This is Larry Snow from St. George talking about how they got here. So I asked him, that it says they already admitted that there's nothing binding upon the convention once called to do these things. According to Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, once the 34 states call for the convention, it's now the duty of the Congress to actually call for the convention, to actually organize the convention. And so I asked him about Congress's duty to adopt these rules.
And then when Congress calls the convention, what would force them to enforce?
To honor that.
To honor that.
We're all speculating at this point because, as you know, Article 5 does not have a lot of direction on what the process would be. And
so he's a
Ben, I'm speculating with your freedom, Ben.
So he's a promoter of the convention, and he admits that this whole thing is just all speculation. We're all shooting in the dark. We don't know what we're doing. We're just kind of meeting together, playing games, and with your freedoms, like you said. And hopefully we'll convince you to go along with it, because we set up these rules that are completely unbinding on the convention once called, and Congress has no obligation to go along with them either. And they admit it.
So there you have it.
So how are the so another part of this thing, so you had to pay $100 to go along. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to play the other clip to go along with that. Where
The Dan Kelly clip?
Yeah.
Okay, which one?
So we mentioned how the delegates are chosen, okay? So he said in Utah you had Greg Hughes, was the Speaker of the House, and then you had the President of the Senate, Wayne Niederhauser, choose reps. And so that's how it was done in Utah. But was that how it was done everywhere? Did everybody have kind of authorization from their legislatures to come here? So we interviewed Dan Kelly, who is a Democrat from Iowa, and what he said on how he was chosen to get here.
And were there anybody else from Iowa that was delegated to come here? Did you get approval from your leadership, or how did that work?
You know, I wish that I wish that there was I'm the only Iowan here.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had another person with me here from my caucus, and I'd love to see someone from across the aisle here as well. But I'm the only one that had an interest in this and came forward.
Okay, so he just kind of do we have the other clip? Oh. About how one of his constituents came to him and said, "Hey, how about you go here?" He's like, "Oh, okay, I'll go to this event to rewrite the Constitution." Didn't have authorization from his.
I'm bored this weekend. I'll rewrite our history, and sure.
But he wasn't authorized to come here from his state. His state legislature didn't say yes, represent us. Leadership of his state didn't say yes, come represent us. And so, do you think that any body that calls for that has the convention is going to go along with it? It's just it's craziness to even think that. I want to, before we end the show, I wanted to get into what did Representative Lowry Snow talk about, because it cost $100 to pay to a private organization to go here, and it's a pay to play to rewrite the Constitution. So who paid Lowry's way?
The organization putting this together is the Assembly of State Legislatures.
Correct.
And on their website, they said to participate, you had to pay a nominal fee of like $100 to be a part of that. And so, was that exclusionary? Did that keep people from being able to participate? So if somebody that Senator Niederhauser or Representative Hughes asked to appoint and they didn't pay the $100, it kept them out of this process?
Yeah. You would have to ask leadership of the Assembly. I couldn't respond to that.
Okay.
President Niederhauser would be a good person to ask. I'm not very involved with the governing board or the executive committee of the Assembly. And so I don't know whether they've had to address that issue.
And so I guess I don't know if you could answer this just for yourself, or if you know how everybody covered that. Was that out of like campaign, personal funds, state funds? Did the House pay for that for you to come here?
I'm paying my own way.
But I mean for the entrance fee, basically.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know who paid my way and who I'm accountable to for this meeting that I was called to go to. And the same thing from the Democrat from Iowa. He was there to represent an amendment that would destroy the Constitution and basically remove the First Amendment. This is Ben McClintock. Thanks to our sponsor, EOS Mobile, the cell phone company that supports conservative candidates and causes. Go to eoscel.com for more information. The Liberty Lineup radio show, the Hollywood Y Guys tomorrow. There's Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore from defendingutah.org. We'll be back next Thursday, 10 to noon.